Well, welcome and thanks for joining us for our Workday Chats today. My name is Greg Pryor, your host for today's discussion. If you do have any questions, please be sure to share them in the comments below. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by John Doel, who is a partner in KPMG's HR transformation business, really focused in the area of digital HR and innovation. And John, it's great. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. I couldn't be more excited, actually. This is one of the breaks in my week and my day where, like you, probably it's been one 30-minute meeting after another. So I've been looking forward to this all week, and it's great to be here.
No, absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time out. You know, as you know, perhaps maybe more than anyone else, the role of the CHRO is more essential than ever. The global pandemic dramatically changed the way businesses operate and accelerated shifts in the way HR is thinking about human capital practices, particularly focus on people and performance enablement. So I'd love to go through a couple of conversation items with you today and get your insights and perspectives. If we could maybe open up with a conversation on an overview of the HR landscape overall. Clearly, 2020 was a year of rapid change. Many HR leaders likely feel like they were the dog that ultimately caught the car. They've achieved extraordinary things through this difficult time, but let me get your perspective. You know, what's next?
Yeah. Well, I really like your analogy, Greg. I think because it captures how I think a lot of HR leaders feel. At the same time, I feel like it might be doing a little bit of a disservice or not giving us as HR leaders full credit for the readiness that we have for what is next. I think, it's clear, coming through COVID, we've got to deal with redefining the workplace and redefining, the workforce and how they're effective in more of a virtual environment. We've got to redefine what the workday looks like, no pun intended, right, for those workers. And I think, and that's what's new, right? But the good news is so many of the other dimensions to the HR leader agenda, around digital acceleration, around culture and inclusion, talent and workforce shaping, so many of those things, experience, right? So many of those are actually things we've been getting ready for years, right? And this, I think, is really, it's affected by COVID. Now we have to rethink about all those things differently now in sort of the new normal. But I think that can really be the catalyst to actually get into more of an activation mode around those topics. So I think it's nothing but upside.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, I mean, my personal experience, I spent 30 years as a practitioner, and I definitely see a bit of a chasm between those people who are preparing, getting good advice from you, your colleagues and others, and preparing for maybe what they didn't know what was coming, but that sense of that. And they generally ended up, in a pretty good spot. And then I spent a lot of time with our customers around the world and HR leaders. And unfortunately, I think to your point, some who maybe thought they had more time to prepare for some of the accelerated change. Unfortunately, we're a bit behind the curve. I think most people have been able to sort of catch up a bit, but I definitely see there's a bit of a split between those who are prepared, those who had been investing in the areas that I know you talk quite a bit about, and then maybe those who thought, hey, I think I have some more time to get this. So definitely, those who were prepared, have generally fared pretty well.
Well, I think, yeah, to your point, this has been just an acceleration and accelerant, right, around getting the investments required to do what's been at the top of the agenda for the CHRO and HR leaders for a long time. So, through that lens, this is, I think we can spin this as a real positive.
Yeah. So let me move on. So at Workday, we have a framework that we believe is sort of central to guiding HR through some of this idea of a changing world. We think about it as the ideas for a changing world, and ideas is an acronym for 5 people imperatives. The first is inclusion and belonging. The second is around digital acceleration, which I know you're an absolute expert in. The third is this area of enabling experiences. The fourth is the agile organization, and the fifth is the skill imperative. And so what I'd love to do is maybe break up our time today, doing a bit of a deeper dive into each of these 5 imperatives and why you believe that they're so critical for the future of HR. Seem reasonable?
Sounds great. You win the award for acronym today, and now I feel inspired to sort of figure out which part of the CHRO agenda you don't have in there, so I could blow up your wording there. But
well, as my workmates know, I'm not particularly smart, so I use acronyms so I can remember those areas. I couldn't have done it without that. Yeah. Well, let's begin. Let's begin with inclusion. Actually, Organizations where employees feel a deep sense of inclusion, we know through the research, are far more innovative and deliver outcomes far better than their competitors. How can organizations nurture a strong culture of inclusion and belonging increasingly in this world where we're actually all more remote?
Yeah, well, I think on this topic, right, inclusion and culture and equity, diversity, my view, of the market is that actually organizations have done a pretty good job of the easy lift here, right? Which is getting the right strategy in place, understanding metrics, putting aspirational goals in terms of metrics, and KPIs around that. And what's lagging now is activation, right? And now is the time to actually go, get uncomfortable on this topic and do the hard work, which I think is activating, right? And I think for me, that there's a number of different, obvious levers that we've been pulling for a long time. I really think that the trend will go and focus more on leadership development. And then when you say inclusion, and I hear you, kind of describe the benefits of inclusion, I just don't believe that anyone will really feel a sense of inclusion unless they have people that look like them from their background that are similar to them in leadership positions. And I'll share with you an anecdote that really shapes my thinking on this topic, leadership development in this space, which is I was having a discussion with a peer of mine a couple of years ago now, actually, and she was describing what it was like coming up through the ranks to become a leader in our organization. And I thought we were going to be talking about how hard it was for her to sort of achieve the skills and competencies, and looking at our job architecture and what that meant for her and how she did that. And what she sort of conveyed, right, was that one mandatory part or one required part of becoming a leader in our organization was interacting with leadership and networking. And how that came to life was through things like eating a meal with a leader, with a senior leader, right? And part of what she talked about wasn't, do I have the right skills to present and convince this person that I'm, ready to be a leader? Part of her story was, I came from a background where I'd never eaten in a restaurant before, right? And I came from a cultural background where I actually, didn't, to look a male, an elder, figure male in the eyes was not culturally acceptable. So the challenges she had for kind of going through the process of becoming a leader in our organization weren't about the competencies, weren't about the skills, were really much more about the personal challenges she had that wouldn't, for me, really illuminating, right, to think about that from a completely different dimension. And I think it shaped my thinking on this topic in that if we're going to really do great leadership development to drive inclusion and diversity, which I think we must, it needs to be pretty personalized, and it needs to be, we're probably not focused on the right thing if we're thinking about skills and competencies and the building blocks of a traditional career architecture. So sorry for the long narrative on that.
No. I mean, so many guys, we could spend the remainder of our time on this topic. I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me from a Workday perspective, and we're so incredibly lucky. My good friend and workmate Karen Taylor is our Chief Diversity Officer, and Karen, we're so grateful she's brought this idea of what we call our VIBE strategy to Workday. And VIBE is around how do we value inclusion, belonging, and equity for all, and really understand, to your point, where everyone is coming from, have this deep sense of empathy to understand we all have different contexts, we all have different situations, and how do we help people have a sense of belonging? We had and I won't go too far into this story, but we had a situation where we have something, as I know you and I have talked about in the past, called Feedback Friday. So every Friday we survey our entire company. I promise it only takes about 30 or 40 seconds. We're not suffering from survey fatigue there, but it's now given us millions of data points, and we're really intentional about looking at that from an intersectionality perspective. And are all people, regardless of gender, generation, geography, ethnic background, having a similar experience? And we discovered that we had one particular population of our engineers in Ireland. We've got a big location in Dublin, Ireland. And what's fascinating, this data came up and it allowed us to engage in an empathy session where we said we engaged this population of folks who didn't have that similar sense of belonging. And we actually listened to stories. And much like the way you've just described, we had one of our most senior engineers, fantastic senior leader, shared the story that came in. We have a customer center in Ireland. She was coming into the customer center during a break to present how she managed our technology to enable 50 million workers around the world to be on our platform. And as she walked in the room on the break, the prospect turned to her and said, "I'm so glad you're here." And she felt really good. "Well, I'm glad to be here," she said. He said, "because I really could use another cup of coffee." And thank goodness she was as smart as she is, because she immediately turned. I could never think about this in a million years. She said, "I'd be happy to get you a cup of coffee. And then I'm really excited to share with you how me and my team enable one of the world's most complex technology environments to operate all the time." And you don't know, to your point, asking, understanding what people's experiences are. This idea of empathy, absolutely critical. Sorry for now. You've inspired me to go go off on this topic.
Now we're out of time.
Now we're out of time. Well, we're gonna press forward, but I love your thoughts on that and the idea of leadership and so many important challenges. We'll keep going through. Talk a little bit about, you're an expert in digital acceleration, which will absolutely continue to be a focus for CHROs. In fact, we have an upcoming session on that with a number of members of our community, some of our great customers. From your perspective, what does this movement look like from an HR lens? And how can CHROs prepare and stay ahead of this idea of digital acceleration and the digital acceleration gap?
Yeah. And to your point, so this is a space I spend an awful lot of my time in. And the last part of your question about how can HR be best prepared to get ahead of this? The first part of my answer to that is that they need to be thinking about what digital means as broader than just technology. It's a huge part of my day is helping HR leaders understand that in order to embrace the digital movement and digital acceleration, it's really about finding the right complementary processes and policy and programs that go along with the expectation for digital experiences, right? And so, where the word digital even sort of turns off some folks in HR and think, oh, that's just an IT thing. I think we need to sort of re-educate and really think more broadly about what it means to be digital and to run a digital HR organization. The second thing, I think, in terms of the technology aspect, most HR leaders think that digital HR is enabled just by the platforms maybe that they have full control over. And this has really come to a head over the last couple of months in this last year, right, as folks moved into more of a virtual environment. But digital, in terms of the technology, creating a great digital HR function is about actually connecting across the enterprise, connecting with enterprise tools that support collaboration and the tools that we're using right now, right, and the tools that we use every day. Part of the expectation that employees have and your workforce has is that they're going to be able to engage with HR in a digital way, and that's going to be really connected to enterprise tools that are being heavily invested in, right? And so there's some synergy there for the HR leaders to access, right? Which is, how do we partner with our enterprise technology leaders and certainly partner with IT as part of this whole digital acceleration? Which is also a mindset shift for some folks in HR, right? I mean, there was a time 10 years ago or 15 years ago where a big part of the cloud movement was empowering HR to do more, from a technology perspective independently, and has always been, right? The HR and the technology sort of relationship is constantly part of what's going to sort of be at the center of successful HR programs and transformation. So I think keeping those things in mind in doing all three of those things probably are imperative in order to get ahead of the digital transformation imperative.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I had the opportunity a number of years ago to spend some time with a number of HR leaders at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Labs, the CSAIL labs, and amazingly enough, exactly as you just described, we came out with really three things on this result of digitalization, and particularly machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the first was this idea of we have to understand what the impact of this digital acceleration is going to have on the world of work itself. And we as HR professionals can play such an amazing role and need to play an amazing role of thinking about how we enable this next generation of work. Second, to your point, a little bit, maybe more straightforward is how we use this technology in a human capital space to augment and enable HR practices so that we can elevate what humans are doing. And then third, and this was a surprise to me moving in, was about responsible AI, and that HR professionals needed to play an increasingly important and essential role in thinking about that. So couldn't agree more. Yes, the technology is there. It's sort of spawning and sparking some of this, but the implications and the role that we can all play, that a CHRO could play, a senior leader, is far beyond the technology. Yeah, couldn't agree more. So we're gonna keep pressing forward. Third area is around enabling experiences. From your perspective, what are some of the new expectations of HR, and what can organizations do to improve the employee experience? What are you seeing as you work with your great customers?
Well, it's a great question. Another topic I spend a lot of my time on, and I'll probably connect it back to your last question, right? Because I view really digital and experience as just joined at the hip, closely coupled. The first thing, and I think the problem statement around experience has always been, or has been over the last number of years, that's a bit too abstract, right? We've seen a lot of HR organizations do journey mapping and do a lot of analysis around employee experience and employee value proposition. And the challenge has always been, how do we connect that then to the way HR works? And maybe more importantly, connect it to the things HR can do to actually influence creating a great world-class, service experience. And so, I think we've started to crack that nut a bit. And the way that we're solving that now is by making sure that we aren't just thinking about the experiences that are important, that define what great HR, service experience means for your organization, whether it's, I'm relocating, or I'm onboarding, or I'm returning to work, right? Or these days I'm going on leave of some kind. These are experiences, these are moments that actually are really tangible collections of HR services and HR processes underneath those services, right? Which traditionally HR has, I think, been really good at creating efficient processes and effective processes that are repeatable and that they can run, but that don't, when taken together, right, actually create a great experience across, all of the things that happen when you go on a leave, right? And so I think, pivoting away a little bit, or connecting processes in the work that HR has always done, connecting that to the moments that matter, to the experiences that actually are what get created by those processes, I think is a mindset shift that helps a lot. And more than a mindset shift, that's the tangible connection that lets us drive really true HR optimization and HR change from the notion of human-centered design and experiential design. So I think that's at the center of that.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, but what strikes me is that the events of the last year have really helped us all think in the broader context, to your point, rather than thinking, hey, I'm just optimizing this process. What is the employee's experience? What is their sense of belonging? How do we have the tools and the capabilities to be productive in these extraordinary times? How do we look at the broader sense of inclusion and where our people may feel in that context? So it's been a fascinating year to sort of raise the altitude of the employee experience discussion beyond, maybe to your point, some of those practices, but really say, at the end of the day, are we an employer of choice? Are we a place that people feel grateful to be at, feel like they have the tools and the resources, to get those things done? And I'm very optimistic that so many HR leaders, so many HR professionals have really, responded to the call over this past year and been much broader and much more, not necessarily intentional, but really stood up and addressed the imperative as it's been handed.
I agree. I think it's the good that's come from this, right, is even at organizations where they felt like they were providing great experiences, that broke down quickly when people went virtual, right? Broke down very quickly. And so that's, that, back to your point about digital, that has spawned tons of investment that HR really needs to keep capturing and leveraging as part of that. But the other thing that it really highlighted, I think, for HR was that even for the experiences that HR thinks they own, or that HR does own, and if those experience like a relocation, right? There are so many aspects to actually the end-to-end experience of relocating, right? That actually highlight HR really owns a subset. Maybe it's 30% of the actual processes and steps within that. And there's so much that goes into that around, learning, around getting reimbursed for some moving expenses, right? Or even getting some information about implications for for working in the new facility where you might be sort of transitioning to. So I think that's been a really big eye-opening experience for HR, right? So just recognizing that from an experience perspective, even for experiences that we think we own, we actually really need to get good at partnering, right? Because we need to partner with IT and with finance and facilities and others in order to actually drive a great end-to-end experience.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And again, maybe one of the in a challenging time, one of the lessons that I hope we don't go back on. I hope we don't, the pendulum doesn't swing, but the partnership that people had with IT, to your point, with facilities, with finance, coming together and really putting that employee at the center. No, couldn't agree more. So moving on here, this past year has demonstrated and really focused on the importance of organizational agility. And we really believe that, gosh, that has become more important than ever to keep up with, with rapid change and rapid uncertainty. How do you think, what's your experience on how HR leaders can foster more agile practices and operate in a more agile manner?
Yeah, I mean, the first sort of element to this, and I latch on to the last part of your question there around how do we be more agile? How do we implement more agile kind of dynamic processes? The first thing is we need to get really good about changing ourselves. We need to allocate some scale to activation and execution of projects, both internal within the HR function and more broadly. So HR needs to allocate scale to doing projects and programs. And so, that can take the form of folks across the service delivery model, right? Those teams could be part of operations. They could come from, even business partner roles. They could come from COEs, right? But somewhere we need to have an arm with some scale that allows us to actually do work on ourselves and for our customers. I think the second thing about agile processes, I mean, stale processes has been a problem forever. And I think the mindset shift that needs to occur is to accommodate more than just efficiency and effectiveness in our processes, right? And to go back to your prior question, when we connect in the experience aspect to our processes, and now we're taking into account, do our processes, even though they're effective and efficient, do they actually create good experiences? Oftentimes that is the trigger that highlights for us the need to change a process, right? So in the past, we maybe didn't get, as long as we were performing according to metrics and KPIs, and we were efficient and effective in closing cases and doing the work, the way that we do in HR, we didn't have a lot of imperative to change. And so now as we add in the dimension of experience, now all of a sudden, a process that was great, a year ago, isn't really a great experience, right? Now that we've been through COVID. And so we can use the lens of experience to help drive and identify and be sort of the trigger for when processes need to change. And then we need to leverage some of the scale in our organization that's focused on, change and projects to do that. This might have been where I should have started too, by the way. The benefit of and kind of the effect of agile as a way of working, and I mean kind of capital A agile as a methodology, has been tremendous, right? In terms of accelerating speed to value. And a lot of IT organizations have adopted this. And I think one thing that HR needs to do better is actually, not just be more agile, but actually learn and be able to work in an agile framework. That'll help as we partner with IT to do technology-related projects, but it'll also help us shape and form and lead work for ourselves in a way that allows us to drive, quicker speed to value. So that might be sort of a tactical thing, but I think you put those three things together and you're in a lot better spot to be able to, operate in a more agile way.
No, I mean, I think you're spot on. I hope that one of the things we maybe take forward with us, sort of post-pandemic, is this idea of experimentation. To your point, I will admit I'm a recovering change management professional. And many of us, especially in HR, and I've had a 30-year career in HR. We were somewhat risk averse, in general, and maybe the organization put us in that spot. But when we got into these places where there was no playbook over this past year, I think it helped us also appreciate, to your point, embracing a bit more experimentation, being quickly resolving, understanding what was happening in real time, collecting sentiment from employees, and then pivoting very quickly and saying to others, much like IT has done historically, is to say, we're gonna test and learn. We're gonna test and learn. We're gonna try a small thing and we're gonna see how it goes. And I think while maybe we didn't have the opportunity to do that in small pockets over the last year, it was forced upon us in a way. And I think it's a good new skill that we have, which is experiment a bit, get quick data, make a quick pivot. I think we should avoid maybe where we spent the last 30 years, which is everything has to be completely baked, that and we seek this perfection, this no risk that probably was never realistic. But how do we embrace, to your point, that really agile methodology, that agile mindset? I think it's enabled us over this past year, and it's something I hope that we take moving forward.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So my last in the ideas is around the skills imperative. Why do you think skills are so critical? Why have they become sort of I believe, the new career currency? And how do we help people close the skills gap? How are you and your colleagues and your customers thinking about that?
Yeah. First of all, skills are the lifeblood of any organization, right? So I think most folks that would be listening to this probably agree with that at face value. In terms of the how, I think we've got the traditional, build, buy, borrow, right? In terms of skills and talent. What I find so interesting about this topic, as we do work for organizations to help, help them deal with, what we call workforce shaping, which is really making sure we understand the talent need and kind of connecting and leveraging all that HR does throughout the year to drive that need and to drive that strategy, which is a whole other topic we could spend an hour on, Greg, because I actually think so much of what HR does in terms of performance management and compensation and other things throughout the year actually are pretty disconnected from the skills gap and the skills need, right? And so we use this term workforce shaping to sort of collect and try to connect, workforce planning with the, maybe more cyclical performance management and talent related activities that HR does. And that's how we look at the solution here. I think this is going to sound obvious, but you would be surprised at the number of organizations that we help who are trying to solve this problem. And they've got learning programs and they're doing, special recruiting, sort of external talent, sourcing type programs, and they're building, diverse leaders, and they're doing all those things. But the thing that they're missing is actually making sure that when they're building these programs, they're actually looking at the talent of as far in the future of tomorrow if they can, right? So we have a lot of organizations trying to solve for, what's my skills gap today, and they never really get ahead, right? They never can get ahead of actually what they need because the skills are changing, the skill requirements are changing, the hot skills are changing so quickly. So part of the unlock for this, I think, is trying to get, a forward-looking view of the skills gap and building your program, your workforce shaping program around a forward-looking view and not a current view. Because as soon as you activate a program to solve with your current, skills gaps, you're already behind and it's, not going to be effective.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many conversations that I'm having with heads of learning, CHROs, talent management leaders. I spent the vast majority of my career in what I would call sort of a skills 2.0 environment. We went out and we did that competency model today, exactly to your point. We looked at the skills we had today and we didn't really look at that horizon. I do think I'm very much a believer. I'm very passionate about thinking about skills sort of 3.0. What does it look like to use machine learning, to use inferred skills, to be thinking about, because to your point, the dynamic nature of how your skills profile or your skills DNA is changing every day in your organization. You have new people coming in, you've got people leaving, you've got people building new skills and capabilities that, this focus of thinking about where is the puck going, to use a famous, Wayne Gretzky quote, that we don't skate to where the puck is today. We have to understand 1 year, 2 year, 3 years in the future, what will the skill profile we need, and then how do we continue to make sure that we're building, growing, trending, identifying, how the skills are growing relative to that future state. It's
Yeah, so
yeah, no,
I mean, take on this, Greg. And this could be a really obvious fundamental thing, but I've been doing this for 21 years now, and I stopped counting clients after a few hundred, right? So 2 or 3 or 400 clients that I've worked with. And how many clients actually do a good job of even keeping track of skills and competencies and keeping them up to date? I mean, so many projects to sort of load or define at a point in time, maybe for their workforce. But it's such a small percentage of organizations that I think have fully embraced and appreciate maybe the value of doing that. But those that have, it's a tremendous uplift for them. And as they've navigated and continue to navigate all of the change across the markets for work and the war on talent, I mean, such an uplift. So here's an obvious one. I mean, how about just do the simplest step here, which is get a plan in place to actually track and manage and retain and have accurate understanding of your workforce skills, competencies, et cetera.
Yeah. So I am way too much of a geek on this, and then I'll take us to our last question because we're running out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time. But I really do believe, exactly to your point, that for me, when I think about what democratized information on the internet, it was HTML. It was that common language. It was that always knowing. And I really believe that, to your point, what I see is organizations who embrace this idea of an HPML, a human performance markup language, particularly using skills or capabilities as the new currency, are really going to unlock and unleash talents and capabilities that that we may not know that we have, that we may need in an instant, in a different context. And so I couldn't agree more. I place this skills imperative. It's all an important list, all 5 of these items. But I really believe that investing in this area moving forward, having that ontology that knows what capabilities you have and then how they're moving and trending. This is a game-changing area that I've candidly been waiting 30 years. You've been waiting, more than 20 years for this, but we're at this really important moment, at this inflection point, I think, in the way we think about our capability, and it's important to invest. All right, so I'm going to ask a 2-part question at the end here for you. I'd love to hear from your perspective, maybe what gives you most heartburn. What's that one thing that, as you think about it, we have to go solve together? And then we'll end with what gives you most hope. What are you most excited about as you think about the future of work, the future of workforce, digital acceleration, sort of heartburn and hope, if you will?
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I mean, think about that question. I don't have a lot of heartburn. My day is full of solving for the same problem over and over. So, in many of them we've talked through here today. So, I'm really encouraged by the outlook and how we've come through 2020 and the COVID pandemic. So I don't have a lot to share relative to doom and gloom, heartburn. What heartens me is the clients that I work with, and most HR organizations are now, in a different way and more so than ever, investing in the key mindset shifts and the key capabilities to be successful, right? And I think we've hit on a bunch of them here, but they're be really good at partnering, be really proactively good at partnering with IT, be really proactively good at partnering with the businesses that you support, and pair that with adding some scale to and some muscle around being able to activate, right, and execute. And if you can partner and you can bring to that partnership that muscle and that scale to actually help them activate, I think the sky's the limit. And then I'm really heartened by the way that the whole notion of consumer experience and customer experience has become a common part of how we think about HR's expectation, because I think it will be, more than anything else, it will be the driver for redefining how HR works, how they're organized, and the value of HR across the organization. So, I'm generally heartened overall by the outlook and kind of direction of the HR function, the seat we have at the table, and am not concerned at all about having been the dog that finally caught the car.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for one of the many reasons we're so grateful for you and we love having you on the show is your optimism. I 100% agree. I think we are at a once in a generation, if not a once in a lifetime opportunity, to your point, to shape the future of work, and maybe even more importantly, the future of the workforce and how we think about that, using the technology, leveraging the technology, empowering and enabling people. So, John, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, the viewpoints that you've shared with me and our audience today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Likewise.
Well, and thanks for joining us for this show. We hope that you stay connected to the various resources that we appreciate sharing with the community more broadly. And please stay tuned for our next episode of Workday Chats. Thanks so much, and have a great workday.